In this episode, I will present to you a real story for a lesson, not a spectacle. The silent witness. The stormy night. It was a dark and stormy night in the small town of Havenwood. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the shadowy streets for brief moments before plunging them back into darkness. Rain poured down in torrents, creating rivers along the curbs and drumming incessantly on rooftops. Inside the Havenwood Inn, the atmosphere was cozy, a sharp contrast to the tempest outside. The guests, seeking refuge from the storm, were gathered in the lounge, where a fire crackled in the hearth. Among the guests was Detective Evelyn Pierce, who was traveling to a conference in the next town. She had decided to stop for the night, seeking shelter from the relentless weather. Little did she know that her evening would take a turn she never expected. A disturbing discovery. As the clock struck midnight, a piercing scream shattered the peace of the inn. The guests and staff rushed towards the source of the sound, finding it emanating from room 302. The door was locked from the inside, and frantic pounding elicited no response. Finally, the innkeeper, Mr. Thompson, used his master key to unlock the door. Inside, they found a horrific scene. A man lay sprawled on the floor, a pool of blood spreading around him. His eyes were wide open, frozen in an expression of shock and terror. On the desk beside him was a single, blood-stained letter opener. Detective Pierce quickly took charge. "Everyone, please stay calm and do not leave the premises," she instructed, her voice authoritative. She checked the man's pulse, but it was clear he was long gone. "We need to call the police," she said, turning to Mr. Thompson. "The investigation begins." The local police arrived promptly, and soon the inn was buzzing with activity. Detective Pierce, though technically off duty, offered her assistance to Chief Mason, who gladly accepted, knowing her reputation as a sharp investigator. The victim was identified as Richard Hayes, a wealthy businessman with no apparent connections to the town. Interviews with the guests and staff revealed that he had checked in earlier that day and had kept to himself. "Do you know if Mr. Hayes had any visitors?" Pierce asked the receptionist. "No, ma'am. He went straight to his room and didn't come out until now," she replied, visibly shaken. Pierce examined the room carefully. The windows were locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. It seemed likely that the killer had been someone Hayes knew, someone he had let into his room willingly. The detective decided to interview the guests one by one, starting with those whose rooms were closest to the crime scene. First was Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, an elderly couple who had been in room 301. "We were asleep when we heard the scream," Mr. Caldwell said. "It was terrifying. I thought it was a nightmare at first." "Did you hear or see anything unusual before that?" Pierce asked. "No, nothing at all," Mrs. Caldwell replied. "We were exhausted from our travels and went to bed early." Next was a young woman named Claire Bennett, who occupied room 303. "I didn't know the man," Claire said, nervously twisting a strand of her hair. "I was in my room, reading, when I heard the scream. I ran out immediately." Pierce studied her for a moment. Claire seemed genuinely distressed, but something about her demeanor struck the detective as off. She decided to keep an eye on her. The clue. While the guests were being questioned, the forensic team continued their work. Pierce examined the letter opener more closely. It was a common design, the kind you might find in any stationery set. However, there was something unusual about the blood pattern on the blade. It suggested a struggle, indicating that Hayes might have tried to defend himself. As she pondered this, one of the forensic technicians approached her. "Detective, we found something you should see," he said, holding out a small plastic bag. Inside was a torn piece of fabric. Pierce examined it closely. It was a distinctive pattern, not from Hayes's clothing. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "Under the bed, near the victim," the technician replied. "Thank you," she said, her mind racing. This could be the break they needed. A hidden connection. The fabric led Pierce to re-examine the guest list. One name stood out: Claire Bennett. When she had been questioned earlier, she had been wearing a scarf with a similar pattern. The detective decided it was time to have another conversation with her. "Ms. Bennett, could we talk in private?" Pierce asked. Claire looked startled but nodded. They moved to a quiet corner of the lounge. "What is it, detective?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We found a piece of fabric in Mr. Hayes's room," Pierce said, watching her reaction carefully. "It matches the pattern of the scarf you were wearing earlier. Can you explain that?" Claire's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "Ms. Bennett, lying will only make things worse. If there's something you know, now is the time to tell me," Pierce pressed gently. Claire looked down, tears welling up in her eyes. "Okay, I'll tell you. But please, you have to believe me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The confession. Claire took a deep breath and began to speak. "Richard Hayes was my stepfather. He was a cruel man, always belittling my mother and me. When my mother passed away, he tried to take control of everything. I came here to confront him, to make him understand he couldn't just walk all over us." Pierce listened intently, nodding for her to continue. "I went to his room, and we argued. He got angry and grabbed me. I was scared, and I pushed him. He fell, and I grabbed the letter opener to defend myself. He lunged at me, and I stabbed him. I didn't mean to kill him, detective. It was self-defense," Claire sobbed. Pierce sighed. "I understand, Ms. Bennett. But you should have called for help immediately. We'll need to take you into custody for now, and we'll sort this out." The resolution. As Claire was led away by the officers, Pierce reflected on the night's events. It was a tragic situation, but at least the truth had come to light. She hoped that Claire would get a fair trial and that the circumstances would be considered. The storm outside had begun to abate, the rain slowing to a gentle drizzle. The guests of the Havenwood Inn began to return to their rooms, the tension slowly dissipating. Detective Evelyn Pierce, though weary, felt a sense of closure. She had once again brought justice to light, even in the most unexpected of places. As she prepared to leave for her conference the next morning, Pierce couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She knew that in her line of work, there were no real breaks, no true vacations. But that was the life she had chosen, and she wouldn't have it any other way. The mystery of Richard Hayes's murder had been solved, and the silent witness of the stormy night had revealed its secrets. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to receive our news.